We got a note from Esther Volcon that she was not going to be able to attend the meeting due to an unexpected conflict. So we still have a quorum. So if it is time, if everybody's ready, I think we can go ahead and get started.
Perfect. Well, if we have a quorum, I guess it'll be my duty to call the meeting to order.
Yep. Alrighty, let me, everybody see my screen okay? Is the agenda on it?
Yes.
Great.
Indeed.
Alrighty, so having put this up, I now need to go away from it for just a moment and read everyone the online meeting preamble that we're required to read for the benefit of everyone before doing these online meetings. After which I will do a roll call and ask each of the members to just say here, if they are, and say very generally your location. You can just say, you know, my home in Albemarle County or my office in Charlottesville or wherever you are. No need to give street address, latitude and longitude, anything like that. So hold on just a moment and let me get that preamble for you. And here we go. Because of the continuation of the COVID-19 pandemic and the limitations on group gatherings imposed by the governor's executive orders, this meeting is being held by electronic communication means on the Zoom platform. It was authorized by the county's Continuity of Government Ordinance and the Virginia statute signed into law on April 24th, permitting this committee to meet electronically to discuss and transact business necessary to continue its operations. The public has real-time audio-visual access to this meeting over Zoom and real-time audio access over telephone, both as provided in the lawfully posted meeting notice. Everyone on the phone and attending via Zoom from the public is in listen-only mode. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the county's website. With all that explanation, I will now ask the committee members individually to identify themselves and their general location. Actually, I will just read off your names and you can say here and give your location. Just a moment. Alrighty. Benjamin Bear.
Here from my home in Batesville, Virginia.
Ron Goldberg.
Here from my home in Earlysville, Virginia.
Sam Keller.
Here.
Peter Lynch.
I am here in my home in Keswick.
Ann Malik.
Here on the farm in Earlysville.
David Powell.
I'm here at home here in Albemarle County.
Liz Sutphin.
Here in my home in Earlysville, Virginia, thank you.
Bruce Folk.
Here from my home in Albemarle County.
Great, thank you all. And Esther Volcano is not attending tonight, as I mentioned. All righty. Our first item of business for tonight, as is true for our first meeting of the year every year, is to hold officer elections for chair, vice chair, and secretary. And of course, it is usually, or it is customary for the staff liaison to be the secretary. Not mandatory, but that usually works out the best. So if anyone would like to, oh, and I should say that our current officers are David Powell, Bruce Folk as vice chair, and myself as secretary. So if anyone would like to make any nominations, they're welcome to. You can either nominate individuals for individual posts, or you can nominate a slate of officers for the three positions.
I guess if 2020 was the first year that both our chair and vice chair had the post, are they interested in continuing for one more year?
Sure, if you are, David.
I'm game, but I believe This would actually be the second or what? Doesn't matter to
So
me.
did David's second year.
Yeah.
Is that a nomination?
If you both are willing, then I would nominate the two of you to continue the posts in the new year.
I would
second for
second that.
All right. I guess I would be honored to do it again. Although I would say that if Bruce would like to step up, I would not stand in his way.
Thank you, David, but I'd enjoy and be honored to serve as vice chair once again.
Alrighty, so we have one nomination for the current slate. Do we have any other nominations?
This is Liz Suffin speaking. I wondered if you could kindly just outline briefly what the roles of these two positions are. I might be interested in stepping up.
Sure. The chair's role essentially is to liaise with staff in preparation for the meetings and then carry out the agenda with staff support during the meetings. Vice chairs for this committee generally are there to learn from the chair and to cover when the chair can't attend. We don't typically have other roles beyond that. And of course, the secretary's job is to keep the minutes and arrange the meetings. And that's my role.
So if participants like myself have questions about particular topics that are being presented, is it appropriate to send those first to the president and the vice chair, or is it best to work with you? I mean, what sort of workload is there associated with those two positions? Thank you.
The workload, well, David maybe can answer better than I can, but generally speaking, the workload tends to fall on the meeting itself and right beforehand when we're getting the agenda ready and all that. I don't generally have daily contact or even weekly contact with the Ag 4 district officers. It's more often just right before a meeting is getting set to go.
Okay, so they're not responsible for research or doing any legwork, so to speak.
No, that's what staff support's for.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Sure. Alrighty, so we got one slate nominated. Do we have any other nominations or any other questions? Hearing none, could we we'll just have a vote on the current slate that's been nominated. All in favor, please?
Aye.
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 I believe that was everyone. Any against? Apologies, I had a slight hardware problem there for a moment. I'm back now. Hearing none against, that sounds like 8-0 in favor of the current slate to continue for another year. Thank you very much. All right, the next item is approval or review, at least, of the minutes of the September 23rd meeting of 2020 that I supplied to you last week. Does anyone have any questions or any other business related to that?
I guess if there's no discussion, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as written.
A second.
I heard a second, but I didn't hear a motion. Did anybody? Sorry, my audio may have cut out.
David made the motion to approve.
I'm sorry?
David Powell made the motion
Oh,
to approve.
Well, he was saying he would entertain a motion. The chair actually can't make a motion.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Move my pad out of the way. I'm back now. David, did you want to go ahead and call for the vote on that?
Okay. I have a motion and a second. Let's call a vote for approving the minutes as written. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? I believe the ayes have it. Minutes are
Okay.
approved.
Thank you. All right, and David, I'm sorry, I was starting to move along from item to item without properly deferring to you, so I will leave it to you when you're ready to move on to the subsequent items.
No offense. Help us stay efficient. It looks like the next item is on the agenda is comment or discussion for our committee to consider into the future for accepting public comment. And this goes a little bit back to your question earlier, Liz. As chair, there's a little bit of time generally taken to discuss matters, not a lot. And this is one that popped up with Scott and I don't know, maybe 10 days ago initially.
Right.
And we talked it back and forth and checked with staff and county rules and ordinances. And I believe, Scott, you prepared a short presentation for us.
Yeah, I've got a few quick slides on this. The distinction, first distinction I want to make for everybody tonight is the difference between public meetings and public hearings. This meeting, any meeting of a board, commission, or committee is a public meeting and must be open to the public, which is why we need to make sure we have the online meetings, for example, not just for the members, but for anyone who wants to attend, and provide links on the county website and all of that. A public hearing is a different sort of thing. A public hearing is a legally mandated opportunity for public comment on legislative acts. That could be a special use permit or rezoning that's processed by my department. It could be the county's budget. Anything like that that requires a board decision may have a requirement under state code for a public hearing. So again, committee meetings are not public hearings. They don't have that same notification requirement for the public. They don't have the same requirements for process at a meeting like you do at a planning commission meeting or a board meeting. However, committees can decide whether or not they want to take public comment on the items they're reviewing. Now, typically, as a lot of you will remember, we don't often have a lot of attendance at AFD committee meetings. A lot of times we've actually hoped we'd have more. Typically, when we're covering the committee's normal business, reviewing a district, adding new parcels to a district, we rarely see anyone attend. Meetings like tonight's, though, when we are reviewing legislative items that are adjacent to or within districts, we often have more attendees. And the question that often arises is, does the committee want to take comment from those attendees? That's not just with this committee, it's really with any committee that's in the same situation. There are probably three options, and I'll try to lay those out for you. One of those is to say this is a committee meeting, this is for the committee's discussion, and we will not include public comment in that. That often happens when something is complex and already time consuming in the space of a 2-hour meeting and can't be covered very well, or involves a lot of committee discussion. Another option, which I have down as number one here, is that if the committee wants to accept public input, but doesn't want to hold a hearing-like discussion section where people take turns speaking, then in the case of these Zoom meetings like we're having now, and for the foreseeable future, we can allow the attendees to enter their comments and questions in the Zoom Q&A, and then Carolyn and I can compile those comments for you and summarize them before you take action. Of course, the final option is to allow people to take an opportunity to speak and let you know what their concerns are. There's a couple of things that you need to know with this. One is that anybody who's going to do that would need to sign up by the Q&A and wait for staff, in this case Carolyn, to let them know when their turn comes up. And it's generally a very good idea to have time limits, in this case, say 2 minutes per person, so that you can still get through all the business you have to cover in that meeting. You might even set a 30-minute limit per item to make sure that the public input section doesn't take away the time that the committee needs for their own discussion. Another important rule that we've learned recently is it's very important to say that attendees who are speaking cannot transfer their time to other attendees because that tends to create chaos in the meeting. So 3 options there, which you all can vote on, whichever you prefer to do for meetings like this one when there are likely to be attendees who have something they want to say about the proposals. No input summarized by staff, or live public input. One thing I will say to cap this off is we would ask that everyone's input be as focused as possible on the Ag 4 district review criteria, not the entirety of the proposal. And I'll go over those review criteria in just a moment. I'll be happy
So
to
Scott,
answer
are
any
you-
questions you might have.
I have a question. This is Liz Seffen speaking. Are you saying that there are actually people who might be online right now, live, wanting to speak tonight?
Yes, I believe there are. I know we have a couple of representatives of the various applicants, and I believe there are a few other people. That can happen with any meeting and often does. It's gotten easier in some ways now for people to attend meetings like this, like a committee meeting, because it's easier to do it by Zoom than to drive all the way to the county building.
And what impression do these individuals have in terms of their prospects for being involved in this meeting tonight?
There's no real set expectation for committee meetings, and this committee in particular has never had any adopted rule about this. So it was merely because we knew from previous experience at community meetings that my department holds that these particular applications might draw a lot of attendees, a lot of interest. And so it might be better for the committee to finally address this matter and have a position on it rather than being caught without a response to people who wanted to speak.
My personal position on this is if the people did not know in advance what the requirements were going to be, then, and if they're already online right now, hoping to speak, that I would vote to have them be able to speak tonight. And if there is a policy that we want to put out for future meetings, I think that would be something we should do. But if people did not know what the policy is tonight, and if it hasn't been established, then we should allow them to speak tonight.
Anybody else have any input on this?
Tim has his hand up. I don't know if you can see it or not.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see that.
I agree with Elizabeth on this. I think it would be helpful for us to know from Carolyn how many people are in the meeting queue that would like to speak. And then just, Scott, maybe in staffing, you could explain for new members the process. There will be a public hearing at both the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors levels, correct? And so that will guarantee a public involvement and opportunity to speak.
Yeah, I was planning to go over that as I talk about the review criteria before I start on the first item. But if you all wanted me to go ahead and cover that now, I can.
I think it would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be helpful to talk about that before we decide on which level we want to include as
Okay. All right, well, with any special use permit or rezoning that is going to go before the board, there's a lengthy process that they go through before they reach that point. We take an application, usually once a month for those kinds of legislative items in community development. And while staff is providing staff input based on our ordinances and plans, we also set up community meetings for these kinds of proposals, which both of these have already had, these items tonight. So there's an opportunity very early in the process for members of the public, especially those who live nearby the projects, to provide input to the applicants before they revise and prepare their final version of their application. So we instituted that requirement a few years ago in order to inform people better earlier in the process of what was happening with the special use permit or rezoning. and to also get better feedback to the applicants earlier in the process so that people can adjust their applications as necessary to deal with the concerns that come up, rather than having those not come up until the very end of the process. Around that same time of the review process, if there is a relevant advisory committee, whether it's the Ag Forest Districts, whether it's the Historic Preservation Committee, and very often it's the Architectural Review Board, that committee or board will have its chance to review the application and provide comment to the Planning Commission and the board. So there's been an informal, not a public hearing, but a community meeting input before it comes to you or any other committee. And then afterwards, every special use permit, every rezoning needs to go to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. In each case, that's a formal public hearing, which has notification requirements by mail and in the newspaper. And people are notified well in advance that this is a formal opportunity to provide comment on the record for the Planning Commission, whose job is to advise the board on land use issues, and for the board themselves, who are the ones who actually have the power to make the decision on whether or not to allow a use or a change of zoning designation on a property. So there's one informal and two formal opportunities for public input on top of whatever we accept by way of email and letters and things like that during the process. Does that help clear things up a bit? Be happy to go over any other questions anybody has.
David, how do you want to proceed through this to figure out how everybody wants to go?
I think at this point, I just prefer discussion about the topics that Scott has presented with us, and then ultimately we'll entertain a motion, I think, of potential ways to move forward.
Okay. Well, then I will start if you don't mind.
Please do.
I think that, providing 2 minutes for somebody to speak, even though they have those other opportunities, is certainly, something we should do. But, with these built-in limits of the 30 minutes and not transferring time and all that kind of stuff, I really don't think, based on the history of the last 5 years or 6 years I've been on this committee, that, that's really a danger. But yes, I think it's something we should do, is do as much as we can to allow people to speak.
And this is Liz Suffin, and I concur with that recommendation. Thank you.
I agree with that as well.
Okay, so far it sounds like we're starting to build some consensus around entertaining some sort of public comment period. So Scott, procedural question, do we need to get into the nuts and bolts of, are we going to have one public comment period, or are we going to have a comment period prior to each agenda item, or how, is there a staff recommendation on how that would work or work?
Normally we would have one for each item, just to avoid confusion.
Yeah.
I think it'd be
Okay.
hard, especially if there was an evening where we had, say, 3 or 4 items on the agenda and we only took public comment for one period. I think that would be really hard to follow for the members.
Okay, and would you please just briefly outline the review criteria that our committee is tasked with? Because that's going to be part, I believe, of how we move forward, because we're only interested in obtaining comments pertaining to what our committee is tasked with, which is the Ag Forestry District.
Sure, I can go ahead and go over that, and if you want to, then we can then come back to this question of how to resolve the comment method. So actually I have this here. And this is in your staff reports and has been there for several years, but isn't something that comes up that often. The county code and the state code contain criteria for a locality's consideration of land uses in or near agricultural and forestal districts. There are 2 separate sections of the ordinance, of our ordinance in the county, that relate to these kinds of uses. There's one section that is about uses within districts. We don't have any of those tonight, so I'm not going to talk about that. And we have a separate section that talks about considering uses adjacent to the district. And this is 3202D of the county code for those who want to read it in more detail. But this is actually the whole subsection here. The county shall consider the existence of a district and the purposes of this chapter in, among other things, land use planning decisions affecting parcels of land adjacent to the district. The way we have always interpreted this in community development is that if we have a proposal for a special use permit, or it's never really been a rezoning that I can remember, that is adjacent to a district, the way that we, quote, consider the existence of the district is to first review it as staff according to the standards in the ordinance, and then to bring it to you all as the committee and the many previous committees to get input on the concerns of the districts, the purposes of the districts, and rather than just having a staff review that covers that consideration, we actually take a comment in the form of a motion from this committee and forwarded that to the commission and the board when they're taking actions on the uses. And again, this refers to the purpose and intent of this chapter. You're all welcome to take a look at those anytime you want in section 3:100 of the county ordinance. But this is it. You can see a lot of familiar words here: conserve, and protect, and encourage the development and improvement of agriculture and forestal lands. Protect agricultural and forestal lands as valued natural and ecological resources, essential open spaces, and again, protecting agriculture and forestal land as important parts of our economy and environmental resources. So that's what the committee's review is focused on. And the distinction I wanted to make, and you all have seen me make this in staff reports before, is the committee has a very focused role, just like the Historic Preservation Committee or the ARB does. The committee's job in a case like this is to analyze and comment on how a proposal would affect the ability of a district to meet its purposes in land conservation, resource conservation, maintaining the agricultural economy. This is in comparison to the very broad type of review that goes to the Planning Commission and board, who have to consider all the aspects of a proposed use. Everything from light, noise, visibility, public safety, architectural features, land conservation, natural resource protection, whatever it is, all of those factors have to come together in one final analysis for the board to make their decision. It's most helpful to us on staff and to the board, I think, if each committee that has a review of an aspect of a proposal like this can be very focused about commenting on how their particular issue is impacted, so that then the board and the Planning Commission can take that advice and meld all those different streams of information together to make a final decision. So having said that, I will take us back to the screen about the public comment options.
I have a comment first before we do that.
Please go ahead, Ann.
Thank you. There was a little bit more of that paragraph that Scott did not read, but I would like to read it now because I think it does contribute to our overall understanding of what our task is today. The policy
Was it this one that you meant?
I'm sorry?
I'm just trying to make sure I put the right slide up for you.
Oh, the one with A and B.
There we go.
And
Okay.
so the end of it was valued in ecological resources which provide essential open spaces for clean air sheds, watershed protection, wildlife habitat, and for aesthetic purposes is part of our task. And we shouldn't forget that. In addition to the agricultural viability of the different farms and opportunity businesses which are in the rural businesses which are in the district adjacent. And I will say that today at the ARB meeting, they punted completely to the Ag Forestal Commission, this committee and others, to report on the impacts of one of these applicants south. They only considered the impact of it from Route 64. So it is important that the Agforestal Committee not punt this, because it is an important set of input that you may have to contribute to the overall process as it goes forward, especially for the maintenance of open space and aesthetics that support many of our rural businesses. Thank you.
David?
Yes,
David,
sir.
This is Tim Keller here. I would suggest a process. I think that we have a process that we use in the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors where there's a staff report and then the committee members ask questions of staff and then the chair opens it up to the public who care to speak. And I think that that would be useful for us to consider as a process for Ag and Forestal as well. It means that we have the background from the staff report and an opportunity to hear what our fellow members are thinking and asking staff before we hear from the public. Then we close the public session. You would close the public session and come back for deliberation amongst us.
Yeah, I think that even though this isn't a formal public hearing, it's totally fine to follow that same process. And it's nice and clear that way because you always know what part of the meeting you're in and it keeps things from getting confused.
Thank you, Tim. Any other comment from the committee?
This is Liz Sutton speaking again, please. Are there people actually waiting right now to speak?
Yes, I'm guessing there are.
Well, nobody is, I mean, we don't, people will raise their hand when we ask for public comment. At this moment, we have 6 people listening, but they won't raise their hand until we open it up after each presentation. And you'll.
Okay, so but just out of respect to those people who have taken their time tonight to be part of this meeting, should we not listen to their comments right now rather than discussing this further? And then once we hear their comments, then we can close and have our own private discussions. I just think that having people waiting, our county taxpayers waiting to have something to say, and we're not allowing them to speak anything, is maybe not the best way to proceed.
At the Planning Commission, we make the presentation and then the public makes a comment, because that way you have it with what you just heard instead of someone asking you. But I'm sure you all can do it any way you would like. It just works out better. This is recorded. It'll be posted tomorrow. And everybody, majority of the people here tonight were at the ARB meeting earlier today. There's a couple extras, but some people have already heard part of this. I'm assuming they're back for the same topic tonight.
But there are many of us on this committee who have not heard any of these comments, other than the comments that we were able to read today quickly before this meeting on the chat or the whatever it was that you all set up for us, which was very great. But we haven't heard anything personally from these people, and they're waiting right now to express themselves.
Elizabeth, this is Tim Keller. I would like to respectfully disagree with you. My feeling is that a great part of the work of these committees and commissions is public education. And the staff report lays out what the real issues are. And then we can have the public respond to what the issues that each body is actually able to comment on properly. And that is why I think it's important to hear from the staff. These flow quite well in the regular process of the many commissions and supervisors meetings that we've had over many years.
But we've all read the staff meeting in preparation for tonight's meeting. So I think all of us that are on this committee are well prepared to hear what the what the public has to say now. We've all studied all the comments carefully. We've read all the additional comments, and I think that we're all ready to hear what the public would like to speak on this.
Well, I will defer to you, but I just think it's important for you to understand that often the public is not clear on this and that have not read the reports that we have. And that's the benefit of having the staff report first.
Yeah.
Well, at first, currently we're having a discussion on how to organize and whether the committee is interested in hearing public comment. So until we entertain those questions, I don't see how we can move forward. Peter, I see you raised your hand.
Yes, thank you, David. Well, yeah, I believe that it is important to go through the process of presenting the staff report that allows us to ask questions when we, if we don't understand parts of it. And going through that process, I think, is important, and then have the ability for the public to comment. So I don't think we want to skip those steps. The only thing I would say is that we can defer making a decision on our future process until after the two items are covered. If we just want to decide that that's how we're going to do these two items, and then we can make the decision on the future just move item number 5 to beyond 6 and 7. I propose that's a possibility.
Thank you, Peter. I would prefer that we set the process before we move forward with the items of business to make business cleaner. And also, if we choose to change the process, it doesn't muddy the waters for what we might have done without rules in place for a single meeting. But obviously, we are a committee, and if we're ready to make a motion on how to proceed, I will entertain it if there's no other discussion.
Ms. Malik has her hand up.
Thank you. The point I would add is that there are some people listening who may come up with a question they wish to ask or a comment they want to make based upon what they hear in the staff report. Staff reports are evolving all the time, and Scott may have new information today. He may not, but he may have new information today that was not in our packet. So it won't take him all day to do that. It'll be, I'm sure, a very coherent and swift presentation, and then we'll all be in the same place when we go forward. So I hope that we can do that. And I'm very grateful for all the folks who have supported the idea of public comment, as brief as it is. Anytime we have a chance to hear what our residents have to say about something in their neighborhood, it's really important to me. Thank you.
Ron here. I agree with David's point that I think we first need to decide how to have comment period. And to that end, I think it's appropriate. I think there's a consensus building. I move to adopt number 2 from Scott's list, live public input. I believe that's what we're moving towards as a consensus.
Great. I can second that if I'm allowed.
You are.
I can't remember if I'm real or a liaison. So
You're real in this one.
All right,
real to me.
thank you.
So, Scott, could you read the motion on the table that's been seconded, please?
Excuse me. So the motion is that the committee would adopt public input option number 2, this meaning that there would be live public input during the committee meeting before the committee takes action. The specifics of this is that the attendees would sign up by the Zoom Q&A. Staff, meaning Carolyn, will notify them of their turn. Each person has 2 minutes to speak. There will be a 30-minute cap to ensure that the committee can complete its work within its scheduled time, and attendees may not transfer their time to other attendees.
I'm sorry, Scott, they don't sign up through the Q&A. They just raise their hand, and that puts them in the queue the correct way.
Right, sorry, thank you.
Sorry.
I appreciate the help.
This is
Thank you, Scott.
And I concur with that, with the exception of tonight's meeting, which I think it's unfair to the public because they haven't been able, they did not know the rules. So the staff report for these 2 actions tonight should be made available to them. And then we should have another meeting where they have the opportunity to provide live public input before our committee takes action.
Those materials have been available on the county website along with the agenda. So the public has that access.
But the public did not know that they would have the opportunity to provide live public input tonight.
True, because they normally don't in committee meetings, and what we're doing here is increasing the opportunity.
But that is important. That's the second part of this. It's very important for the public to have the knowledge that they can provide their input. And the background information has been diligently provided by the county, but they did not know, the general public, that they would be able to provide input before the committee would take action tonight. So I think it's important that we defer our decision-making tonight and put this information out to the general public that they have this opportunity.
Elizabeth,
We have a,
I'm confused. I'm confused about what we've gotten good input via the Dropbox, and also we will have more input today. Which decision are you wishing to defer? The decision on our recommendation on these projects, or the decision about the operation of the committee? So
The decision about the operation of the committee sounds very good. The
Okay.
decision that the public would be weighing in on does not sound like it was established before this meeting tonight. So in fact, the information wasn't available to the general public that they would have the opportunity, the wide general public, to provide input tonight in a live manner. And there may be some people waiting to speak, but in general, it wasn't made known that this is how our committee would proceed.
There's one procedural concern I will raise with this is that the Scrooby item, which is a personal wireless service facility, is due to the federal regulations on localities' ability to review these in a timely manner. If we were to delay this committee's comment on that item, it would probably cause a bit of a train wreck with the rest of the review process. We have a limited amount of time in which the county must make a decision. So pushing that consideration later would probably raise major difficulties for the county and the applicant both in taking us off the established and very limited time clock that we have for reviewing those kinds of facilities.
But just from a reasonable point of view, we did not receive the public comment today for our general committee members until this afternoon. So those of us that are on the committee were not able to even see public comment until this afternoon when we were given this access to this information.
if I may, I believe we're confusing two separate issues at this point. The committee, at this point, has not made a recommendation or decision to accept any input. So it's a bit premature to talk about additional agenda items, in my opinion. So do we have any additional discussion about the motion that's on the table and been seconded? Hearing none, I'll call the question for the motion on the table to accept option number 2 as a committee. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, it sounds as the motion passed to accept option number 2, to accept public comment period. So that brings Liz's question to the table for discussion, I believe. Do we need to defer because the committee today took action to increase public input or not?
My point of view would be that we listen to the presentation, we hear the public comment of people who happen to come today. This meeting was one of several which was announced repeatedly at other meetings about these topics. So I think there's more public awareness about these than perhaps others in the past. And I also would invite that anybody who didn't make a comment today would be able to send their comment to, or previously could certainly send an email to me or Tim or Scott or anybody on the committee, and we will make sure that that gets incorporated into the staff report that goes forward to the Planning Commission and the board. That keeps us on track calendar-wise.
Thank you, Ann. Any other comments or discussion?
I believe we should move forward and discuss and decide on items 6 and 7.
Thank you. Procedurally, Scott, is this something that we need to adopt as a motion, do you think?
I think the only motion we really needed was the one you've done, which was to adopt the form of public input. The procedure that we've been discussing is common to essentially all of the committee and commission meetings that we run, with staff presentation followed by committee discussion, and then public input before an action. That's just an established form that we've followed for decades in every kind of meeting that we do.
I'm sorry, I believe I misspoke as to the concern that Ms. Sutphen raised about public comment this evening on the next two agenda items.
If you all are going to make a formal decision about that, then yes, that should be done in the form of a motion. And again, I would recommend against at least deferring action on the Scrooby item because we are under a mandated time limit on our ability to review that kind of application.
Okay, moving on to Ms. Sutphen's comments. Is there any other discussion around this issue? If not, I'll entertain a motion to determine the committee's feelings on how we should proceed for the rest of the agenda tonight.
Well, then I will make a motion that we continue with items 6 and 7 tonight to resolve them.
Thank you. Is there a second for the motion on the table?
Second that.
Okay. I do believe we've noted the concerns about public comment, and we've heard some pros and cons. We currently have a motion on the table to continue, but that's been seconded. So last call for discussion. All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor of continuing with tonight's agenda, please signal by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? All right, thank you. Motion passes. If you would move us to our next agenda item, Scott, please.
Alrighty. Apologies, I had a slight delay there with a phone interruption. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is SP 2020-12 Scrooby property. I apologize, Scrooby is missing from the agenda sheet there. I was going to go through these review criteria, but I have done that already, so I'll move on to Scrooby itself. Alrighty, so this is a proposal for a 94-foot tall monopole personal wireless service facility. We are located on a 1.1 acre parcel on Greenwood Station Road, adjacent to Interstate 64 and to the Yellow Mountain District. You can see here the red dot is showing you the approximate location of the pole itself. And the green parcels, of course, are the district in question. I should say before I go too much farther here that I believe we have representatives from the applicants for both of these items tonight here to answer questions for you. So once I get done with my presentation, you'll have a chance to ask questions. If you have questions for the applicants, they will also be able to respond. So just another aerial view of the little closer end of the districts and the proposed tower location. You can see obviously the intent here is to provide coverage of not just for the whole surrounding area, but also primarily to have access to Interstate 64. This is Route 250 down here. Greenwood Station Road provides access to the tower itself. This is that 1.1 acre property, and the existing driveway would be used to provide access to a new driveway and pad where the pole and the associated equipment would stand. This property here, Seven Oaks Farm, is one of the properties in the district, as is the one across the road. Just to give you an idea of what the pole would look like, or these poles in general in the county are designed to protrude no more than about 10 feet above the nearby trees. So there's a detailed tree survey done. This is the reference tree, which is the tall tree close to the pole. It is established as a benchmark for permitted heights. So would it be a metal monopole, antennas at the top? This is a photo simulation of approximately what the facility would look like from, in this case, although the applicants did several photo simulation sites, I just selected this one. This is within Seven Oaks Farm, which is that property in the district. So we're looking north across one of the vineyards within that farm toward the tree line, the proposed tower, which is simulated here, and right beyond that is the interstate. So for each of these proposals, and by intention those that come along in the future, we'll review these against the policies to be supported by these districts as established in section 3.101 of the county code. So A in that section is production of food and other forestal products. And again, as I may have mentioned earlier, the concern about food production within the districts, we don't feel that there's a limitation on the districts by having a pole there. The traffic for construction of this facility would be short-lived, and after that, there would not be much traffic except for very occasional maintenance visits. So there's not an ongoing obstruction to farm-related traffic in this portion of the county. Essential open spaces. This property, again, is located adjacent to the district and not in it. This doesn't provide any obstruction to open spaces. Wildlife habitat connectivity here is minimal because of the interstate anyway. The functions of the district itself to carry out protections like watershed quality, wildlife habitat protection wouldn't be impeded by this. It may be, however, that, as Ms. Malik has already raised, that you all feel that there is an aesthetic impact to those essential open spaces. So I wanted to acknowledge that point that she had raised earlier. Third of 4 criteria, strong agricultural and forestal economy. The existence of the pole itself does not impede the economy. It may be of some use if there are farms in the area that are using that service, but it wouldn't be an impediment to the agricultural economy. And then D is about natural resources and retaining continuous and unfragmented land. Again, this is not a use that is providing a blockage between 2 districts or cutting across a wildlife habitat corridor or a stream buffer. This is in a location where land fragmentation is, land is in unfragmented form to the south of the interstate and to the north of the interstate. The interstate itself is really the main fragmenting feature here. The addition of this tower to the already small parcel of land, which is 1 acre, would not significantly change that. So based on our assessment that the physical impacts of the proposed use will be limited to the parcel adjacent to the district and would not impact agricultural resources in the district, staff is recommending that the committee advise the board and the commission that the proposed use does not conflict with the purposes of the districts. Now, of course, you all are free to make your own assessment. And in order to help clarify things a bit, one thing I've added here is a couple of selected motions. You can use these or not, but this is something we do for the Planning Commission and the board to help them in phrasing their decisions and to sort of give a couple of options to focus on. So this committee has probably not seen this before, but this is something that's been very helpful in other forms of meetings. A couple of motions here. Should the committee find there are no conflicts, there's this motion, and then there's option B if you find that there are conflicts. And again, if you do make that finding, it's very helpful to us for you to specify what those objections are, rather than having a generic motion, so that the commission and the board can assess the impacts that are being covered. So that's the staff report that I have for that item. And expect from here that I'll be happy to answer any questions from the committee. The committee can have discussion, and then we can move on to the public input portion.
Thank you, Scott. Is there any discussion or questions pertinent to the application before us.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So in the criteria which Scott has just talked about, it talks about the economic success of agricultural-based business in this area. So is there a consideration of impediments to tourism-based businesses on the agricultural properties? And I'll just leave that thought for someone else to comment on.
I agree that that is the only effect I would see that we consider to the parcels in the Ag Forest District. My question is, though, also to consider is the reason why we are considering this question is only because this parcel is adjacent to the district, but there are hundreds of parcels that are not adjacent to the district that would be in the same view shed, and it would not come to our committee for that reason, if they just happen to be one parcel away instead of adjacent. So we're talking about a restriction just for these surrounding parcels or these adjacent parcels. It's not a question really, it's just a statement.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
So I would just add, I do see an issue with this because there are, several wineries right there and farms. And, people go to those wineries to enjoy the scenery, to sip their wine. They don't want to be looking at a tower.
Thank you.
I wonder if Scott could put up the, it was one of the pages in the staff report that had section 3-100 with A, which was policy, and B, which is, it's basically what Peter and Ben and Ann have all been talking about.
Give me just a moment. I'm sorry, you were saying sections 3-100 and
It was
3-101?
a paragraph that had section 3-100, and then it had A, the policy part, and B, which was the sort of listing of impacts, I think.
Sure. It'd be easier if I just,
Because I'm tending the same way as the previous speakers, and I just thought that this was a textual way to see what we're all seem to be talking about. So yes, at the bottom of A, there is as well as for aesthetic purposes, which then in going down to B, so that was in A, and then in B, to conserve and protect agricultural and forestal lands, open spaces, as well as for aesthetic purposes. And I think that what everyone has hit on is this link between the aesthetic resource and the agricultural resource. And that there is this interconnection between the vineyard, the winery, the agrotourism, as well as that greater feeling of where we have a number of rural historic districts that are coming together with a number of ag and forestal districts. But yes, today we're to talk about ag and forestal, but to my mind, this interconnection, so I find myself disagreeing with staff, and I most of the time agree with staff, but in this particular case, I disagree with staff and think that there is an impact that's showing from both A and B in this. Thank you.
I think that was very well said, Tim. I completely agree.
let me know if whenever you want me to take this code section down and put the presentation back up or anything else.
Thank you for those comments. Is there any other discussion?
I have two people that have their hands raised.
Okay, I don't see that.
Yeah, I can see them on the attendee side. When you're ready for public comment, I have at least two.
Oh, for public comment. Okay, thank you. All right. Within the committee, did I just see Lori's hand go up? No.
Hi, this is Lori Schweller. I'm not within the committee. I'm representing the applicant.
Okay, thank you. Within the committee, is there any other discussion? Are we ready to move on to accept public comments? All right. Thank you. So, Ms. Schweller, I believe you have 2 minutes then.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Since we are having a public hearing, I think it would benefit the committee to see all of the photo simulations so that you can really see what this short brown monopole would look like in the context. Far from being an impediment to tourism, we believe that it will be a benefit to the wineries in the area as it will provide necessary wireless service for customers who will be taking pictures and texting and enjoying the winery. For the most part, their view of it would be within the trees and so wouldn't be visible when the leaves are on the trees, which is when most people do visit wineries. And from the winery itself would have a mountain backdrop, so the brown color would blend in with the monopole. In terms of the considerations of this committee, other than aesthetic considerations, wireless communication is essential to farm safety. In our work in rural areas, we hear farmers all the time talking about the need for wireless to deal with accidents in the field. It's also, as I'm sure you know, agricultural technology relies on wireless. The Commonwealth Connect report expects 18% increase in agricultural output through connected agricultural technologies. So wireless can benefit the agriculture in the county. Adding this very small area, it's just a 40 by 40 foot lease area within the wooded area, will also support the landowner who does have cows on his neighboring pasture land. And I would note that the ARB did address exactly what the ARB is supposed to address, which is the entrance corridor. This site is almost 3,000 feet to Route 250. And since the parcel is not abutting 250 and is not within 500 feet of 250, it's not appropriate for the ARB to consider.
Lori, I'm sorry, but your 2 minutes are up.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, board.
Okay, are you ready for more public comment? Okay. Next, we have Todd Zimmerman. Todd, please state your name, address. If you're with a group or organization, tell us the name of that. Your 2 minutes starts now.
Thank you. My name is Todd Zimmerman. My wife and I are owners of Seven Oaks Farm, which is the farm in the Forestal District, and we also operate Septenary Winery on the premises, which is a farm winery. Contrary to the prior comments, we would not benefit in any way, shape, or form to our minds with the existence of this tower. And in fact, for both aesthetic purposes, which would be largely negatively impacted for us on the property and for our customers to the property who tell us all the time they enjoy our views. Also, the agricultural economics would be impacted because, again, that's part of the reason we have the great tourism here is enjoying the typical Virginia views that you see here. What I find particularly unfortunate about this entire situation is I think all this can be minimized with a little bit more circumspect consideration of locations for this tower. It doesn't have to be right there. It's just where the site's been selected, and a little bit further down that same property to benefit the same property owner, and put a pole there for the same benefit of customers. You can move it outside the aesthetic impacts that we're presently going to have. So please consider those things and understand that it does conflict with the purposes of the district. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, next I have Nancy. I'm not even going to try your last name again this evening. Please state your name, address, and you have 2 minutes to start, and your time starts now.
Thank you, Carolyn. It's Nancy Schlichting, and I represent the owners of Mirador. We actually own that small piece of this district you're reviewing on the other side of I-64. There's that one little sliver, and they do own that. We disagree with Ms. Schweller's assessment that that there is no that the visibility is limited, that there would not be an impact on the visibility or the enjoyment of the area by visitors and by residents. We disagree that the photographs reflect that it's the pole will be covered by a mountain backdrop. In fact, if you saw the simulated photos, even with the trees included, which are slated to be removed, those photos reflect that there is a skylit view of this tower from many vantages, including Route 250. And that was what was disappointing about the ARB meeting, was that there was an effort to deflect that. But the bottom line is that it was very visible from many points on Route 250 even. We are in agreement with Todd Zimmerman. There is no need for additional cell phone coverage here. It's just trying to supplement what they already have. There is no safety issues for any of the farmers. There's no reason for this tower to be placed where it's being placed. As Mr. Zimmerman pointed out, there's places on the same property owner's land just further east, which would take that tower out of the view of all who enjoy that district, including residents, visitors, customers of Mr. Zimmerman's, and the residents that live there. And I appreciate this committee's willingness to listen to public comment. Like Ms. Malik, I think it's very important for the public to be heard, and I do appreciate that opportunity.
Thank you. We don't have anybody else that wants to speak at this time.
Thank you. Thank you for all who commented. And I guess it is now time for the committee to resume its discussions about our task about this proposal before us.
And if you have any questions for staff or for the applicant's representative, please feel free to ask those.
I guess I would have one question for the applicant or the individual who spoke in favor of the proposal from the public. Is there a way to modify a tower so that it looks something other than a cell phone tower?
Chair Powell, the Albemarle County zoning ordinance is a very strict ordinance, and this facility complies with those strictest parameters, which is a brown monopole with flush mounted antennas 10 feet taller than the reference tree. And we think, based on extensive experience throughout the state, that a short brown monopole is the best camouflage for a wireless facility when it's within a grove of trees, as this one is. And so when the leaves are on the trees, you don't see anything but the top 10 feet, as you saw in the photo from the vineyards. When the leaves are not on the trees, you see just the pole, which looks just like a tree trunk. The only other alternative that would provide another stealth option, I think you're asking, would be as if it were designed to look like a tree itself, as a monopine. Those tend to have to be a little bit taller in order to make sure it tapers at the top above the level of the antenna. But that's an option that we have done in the county before at the Department of Forestry off Route 250. And it's a very expensive option, not good for the applicant, not desirable by the wireless industry, because when equipment is replaced and maintained, all the branches have to be removed and so on. But that, to answer your question, that is one of the stealth options.
Thank you. Any other discussion within the committee? Yes, sir, Tim. I believe you have to unmute.
I needed to unmute. I wonder if the applicant could address the close by relocation to an adjoining site that was brought up by the speakers.
Yes, Mr. Keller, we've been talking with the Zimmermans, Nate Holland and I, today about the possibility of shifting the site to the east on the existing subject parcel, or even on a nearby parcel. Obviously, that's something that we would need to consult both the property owner and the applicant, Verizon Wireless, about. There are a lot of considerations that we'd have to look at for that change. Not only the applicant's use, Mr. Scrooby's use of his own property, of course, but in terms of the facility itself, the property drops in elevation. It looks like about 30 feet as you go to the east. If you're driving along 64, you can see that as you move east, you see about half of the trees. So instead of being above the road, you suddenly become below the road. And so what that means is the monopole would have to be increased in height. And that could mean 30 feet. So if you think about maybe putting a 130-foot monopole there, that could be a benefit to Mirador. It could be a benefit to Septenary Winery, potentially. All of that has to be evaluated if it were to work for the engineers at Verizon Wireless, let's just say, and you had a balloon test. But what you might find in that situation is that all the residences on the north side of I-64 suddenly see a 130-foot monopole, whereas now they see nothing. So it's something that would have to be evaluated from an aesthetic point of view, from all different directions, through the special use permit process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ron here, if I can ask a question of staff.
Please go ahead.
And I'm not sure if it's the right staff, but I'm not seeing, how would staff answer the question, have you considered the aesthetic element of the ag forest guidelines?
You're muted, Scott.
Sorry, I keep telling myself I'll remember that. No, I will. I think you can see in my staff reports, it's quite clear that I was focused on the more measurable physical impacts of the use, and with the thought that the aesthetic portion of the review is going to be done more by design staff and the architectural review board. So if this committee feels that that aesthetic aspect is an important part of these reviews, certainly I'll keep that in mind for future reviews, but it wasn't a strong focus of what I did for this meeting.
Thank you.
I've got a question. Kind of following up on that, every cell tower requires a special use permit, correct?
No, there are different categories. Some of these wireless facilities are by right, depending on their locations.
Okay, I'm sorry. In a rural area zoning.
I'm sorry, I would have to go back and check where the cutoffs are.
Okay.
Some of the ones like this that are tier 3 tend to be because they're in a historic district, not
Okay.
just in a rural area. And I'm sorry, I don't recall the rest of the provisions of the code enough
Okay.
to say
So,
where the cutoff is between by right and special use permit within the
Okay.
R8 zoning district.
Peter,
okay. So,
Peter and
Okay.
David, Lori could give you a quick answer to that one. There's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. There's a lot of complications to this.
okay. Okay. Well, I was kind of leading to, if there is a special use permit needed for a tower, is aesthetics ever considered outside of our purview? It just by CDD in the approval process?
It's most often addressed by the Architectural Review Board. They are our experts in visual and aesthetic analysis, and they have a long history with that and an established set of guidelines for how they review those kinds of applications. The Ag 4 District Committee doesn't have any kind of real history with that or a set policy, whereas the ARB has a very detailed list of guidelines for how to evaluate visual impacts.
But are they only looking in relationship to the entrance corridors, like?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
right.
They're
That's their job.
not from other views.
Right.
Okay, all right.
I think it's important that this committee undertake their own thought about this because, as I mentioned earlier, the ARB decline to make any comment about this today because of its limited guardrails and what its task is. So since it says in our ordinance that we can consider the agricultural economy and aesthetics, that was why I pointed that out, so that this committee did not miss its opportunity. What is damaging is if people don't express their views, whatever they are, then Scott has nothing on which to base his recommendation going forward, except that it's taken as approval. And there may, as this evening we've heard lots of discussion about concerns. So I just encourage you to make sure you make your point clear.
I'll just follow that by saying as Ms. Malik says, we want to hear your input, and the more specific your input is, the more helpful it is, I think, to the commission and the board. So we make a recommendation. We certainly do not expect that the committee would accept that on its face. We want to have the discussion and we want to get your actual input on what your concerns are.
Okay, so just to finish up my thought then, the only reason I'm kind of bringing this up is if it was one parcel further away from the district, would anybody consider the aesthetics from the farm? Or is it only because it's adjacent to the district that anybody is even considering the view from the, not the farm, but the winery?
Well, the proximity to the entrance corridor triggers the review by the ARB, which happened earlier today.
All right.
And the proximity to the district triggers the review by this committee. If there was, just for contrast, a tower proposal that was along a road that was not an entrance corridor and was neither in nor adjacent to an Ag 4 district, then the extent of the aesthetic review is the requirement to follow the county's established design guidelines in the zoning ordinance, which is, as I believe Ms. Schwaller mentioned, the requirement to use these minimally visible monopoles, the limitation to 10 feet above the reference tree. There isn't a body that reviews that. There's simply a set of criteria in the code that says, no, you can't have a 200-foot lattice tower. You have to have a wooden or brown monopole that's no more than 10 feet over the reference tree. But we've encoded most of the basic aesthetic limitations into the zoning ordinance. And it's only in these areas of special concern that we have bodies like yours reviewing to an additional level of detail.
Okay, so the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors might consider it based on public comment, but otherwise only based on our recommendation or the
ARBs. Yeah.
ARB. All right, thank you.
Any follow-up discussion from the committee?
I keep
Go
saying
ahead, Tim.
Elizabeth is trying to speak and I'm not hearing her. Are you all hearing her?
No, I'm not.
No,
I get something across the top of my screen that says that she's speaking.
I see that her microphone is not muted, but I don't hear anything. Now it's muted.
Elizabeth, perhaps you could let us know in chat or Q&A if you want to make a comment.
No, I'm here. I'm listening. I'm
There we
listening.
go.
I'm listening carefully to everything, and I'm ready to vote. I've already made my decision. So whenever you're ready to call a vote, I'm here to put in my 2 cents. Thank you.
Well, I thank you. I think we need a motion for the committee to consider if we're done with our deliberations.
And let me put my presentation back up again so you all can see a couple of these sample motions that you can consider.
Well, Elizabeth, if you know how you would vote, I would tender you might want to suggest a motion.
Yes, please. I suggest a motion that we open this up for a vote for our committee members, please.
What are we voting on? What is your motion?
We are voting on proposal number 6.
If you look on your screen, there's a couple of sample motions that you can use.
Well, I'm sorry.
for
I don't have a screen. I have no
Oh,
screen.
I see.
I don't have a computer, so I'm on my phone. Pardon me.
I'm
for
sorry, I didn't realize that. Okay, so let me read these out. There's 2 possible motions here. And again, these are just samples for your consideration. Option A was, should the committee find that there were no conflicts with the purposes of the districts, then a motion might be, I move that the committee find the proposal does not conflict with the purposes of the districts. Option B is the opposite. Should the committee find that the proposal conflicts with the purposes of the districts, a motion might be, I move that the committee find that the proposal conflicts with the purpose of the districts because it, and then you can fill in the reasons from there. I can put that in the chat for you if that's easier, so you have the text in front of you.
So if you're asking for my, I can't see what you're all looking at, but if you were
Yeah, I'm
just
going to try to put it in the chat for you. Hold on just a
be
second.
so kind for me to say that I agree with number B, that this conflicts with the aesthetic links to the agriculture and forestal districts and the economic impacts that this might entail, and that the recommendation would be for the applicant to research other locations.
I second that.
Thank you. We have a motion on the table and a second. Give Scott just a second to write it down and then read it back.
Okay, as I understand it, the motion was the committee find that the proposal conflicts with the purposes of the districts due to the visual impacts and the economic impacts on agriculture in the district. I may not have gotten that exact, but is that close?
Does that fill your thoughts, Elizabeth?
Yes, as Ms. Malik stated to all of us at the onset of this meeting, that there's an aesthetic link to agriculture forestal districts, and there's also an agriculture economic impact of the aesthetic aspect of it.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question for the motion on the table. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say no.
No.
Thank you. So Scott, did I tally 7 affirmative and 1 no?
That's what I have as well.
It appears that the motion does carry, noting that we did have a dissenting member of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alrighty. Anything else about that one, or should I move on to the next item?
I think we're ready to move on to the next item.
Thank you. All right. Another special use permit request adjacent to, actually in this case, 2 of the districts. This is the Waiver Tree Hall Special Events proposal. Ms. Schweller also is representing these applicants, so if you have any questions for the applicants, she can respond to those. So background here, the proposal is a 145-acre parcel on Plank Road, west of Batesville. It's adjacent to both the Yellow Mountain and Batesville Ag 4 districts. Property is also under conservation easement held by the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. The proposal is for special events, which are events such as weddings and gatherings, not necessarily related to an agricultural use. Up to 18 times per year, with 14 events limited to 150 attendees and 4 events limited to 350 attendees. And special events use, which does not require primary agricultural use in the property, requires a special use permit from the Board of Supervisors. So here is a map of the property. Here's Plank Road. Batesville lies to the east. Dick Woods Road is here at the south side. The red is obviously the subject parcel.
We can't see your screen.
We don't
We don't
see
see
your
your
maps.
screen.
Sorry. Let's try that share again. Thank you for telling me. All right. There you go. Can you all see that now?
Now we see it.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate you letting me
Yes.
know. I'm not sure what went wrong there. Okay, so again, 145-acre property on Plank Road, adjacent to the Yellow Mountain and Batesville districts. And what I had moved on to was this map, which shows you the property in red. Plank Road on the north side, Dick Woods Road on the south. Main access for the events use that is proposed would be from the Plank Road entrance. And you can see that the Yellow Mountain district is adjacent to the north and the west, and the Batesville district to the south. And then I've labeled this area here, which is a former equestrian facility, is where the events would be held. And then this driveway here leads back into this area where there would be parking. So entrance, main activity area, parking area. Just an aerial view so you can see some of the land uses on the ground in that area. The majority of this property is open. The majority of the adjacent Yellow Mountain district parcels are open. The Batesville district to the south is more wooded, although it does have dwellings in it. And this is just to show the concentration of the uses on the site, which would be on the entrance road from Plank, the event area here, and then the guest parking area is here just to the west. So again, the same review criteria from section 3101 of the code to analyze how this would impact the districts. So for criterion A, the production of food and other agricultural and forestal products, we don't believe that this use would impede such production on the property itself or necessarily on those immediately adjacent parcels. It is possible, and I'll discuss this more in more detail in a moment, that there would be some traffic impacts and that might impact other farm users on the nearby roads. Typically, from our experience, the real impacts from these event uses are traffic and undesirable noise. For criterion B, protecting essential open spaces, again, this property is under easement, so it can't be divided more than it already is. This was quite some time ago in the 70s. This property was developed with these houses you see along the south, and then this was the open space parcel, which is now under the easement. There are no direct impacts from this use into those open spaces in the adjacent districts. Criterion C is about strong agricultural and forestal economy. Again, the only real concern we have about impacting the nearby farm uses is from traffic. So I wanted to quantify what the traffic impacts might look like. This is from the applicant's special use permit application, where they have calculated out what the traffic impacts would be for the two different sizes of event uses. And again, this would be for the 150 people, you would have those 14 times a year. And for the 350 people, they're proposing that 4 times a year. So the daily total number of trips, and a trip is in or out, so the number of vehicles is actually half this, but the number of trips on the road for the 150 person event use would be 160, because of course people share vehicles, people tend to come as couples, things like that. And then for 350, the number of trips they've calculated out is 202. Unfortunately, VDOT didn't have any trip counts for these roads. I wasn't able to really put that in context of what the total traffic load is on the roads. Unfortunately, so all I can really give you is these straight counts for the use itself. Of course, VDOT is the agency that controls the roads in the county. This has been reviewed by them. They've found the use to be generally acceptable according to their standards. I asked them a few more questions to clarify some of the safety concerns I had heard from neighbors. They found that they did have sufficient sight distance at the entrance, appropriate for a low volume commercial entrance. Sight distances were not impeded by the terrain around the entrance, so they felt that the use was appropriate according to their standards. And the last criterion D is natural resources and retaining continuous and unfragmented land. Again, this property is under a conservation easement and would not be further fragmented. And there are no significant vegetation changes that would change, say, a forest habitat corridor or something like that. The use is limited to existing structures on the land. So again, staff's analysis, the straightforward physical impacts of the use would not impact agriculture in the districts or in the area, and recommend that the committee advise the board and the commission the proposed use does not conflict with the purposes of the districts. Again, to answer Mr. Goldberg's question, this is a very straightforward analysis on physical impacts and doesn't really attempt to take into account more subjective aesthetic criteria. But I'll be happy to answer any questions. And again, Ms. Schweller is here if you have questions about the applicant's proposal.
Thank you, Scott. Are there any questions from committee members to Scott about the proposal so far?
I do. Scott, this is a conservation easement parcel, and what is the tax map number?
Let me go back up to the map here. So it's tax map 70, parcel 39 in the red there.
Got it.
Actually, there's a better map here, so you can see it better. And that easement is held by the Virginia Outdoors Foundation.
And this is all allowed under the easement, all this activity?
Well, I'll let the applicants respond to what they've heard most recently from Virginia Outdoors Foundation. We typically ask applicants to provide documentation of the easement holders' acceptance of the proposed use. And we do have an indication from VOF that this is an event use is acceptable under the terms of the easement. But I believe the applicants have talked to the Virginia Outdoors Foundation more recently than I have, so maybe they can address what they've heard from them.
Okay.
I have a question, Scott. I see in your report, you mentioned the existing driveways and facilities, yet we mentioned a parking lot, which I don't see addressed. Is those parking lots going to be natural cover? Are they new? Or what is the status of the proposed parking on these properties?
That's a good question. One of the items that I expect to be revised and resubmitted by the applicants will be more detail about the parking. Is that something we were still discussing? This application has actually been deferred by the applicants as far as consideration by the Planning Commission and the board goes, in order to give them more time to deal with the feedback they've heard from the community. While they're doing that, I expect that they will also be providing more detail about the parking. What I can tell you, however, is that we are trying to find ways to minimize the new impervious surface on the site. One of the proposals so far is, you'll see this gray area here, which is an old riding ring, which has a sort of composite rubber gravel surface on it. And I believe the applicants are researching the viability of that surface for parking rather than creating a new impervious surface somewhere else. They would have to create a driveway out to that, obviously, because it doesn't go all that far. But there were various concerns. We discussed this with the applicants about where they were going to put the parking. A lot of the reason they wanted to use these existing areas that I'm indicating here is that there would be a fair amount of grading that would be required on other surfaces nearer to the event buildings. And so they're trying to find a way to use these already disturbed areas. I expect to have more information about that with the next revision and before it goes to the Planning Commission. But the most recent discussion was trying to find a way to reuse these previously disturbed riding ring areas.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee or discussion? I think I saw Tim's hand first, Ann.
I have a question for, maybe Scott, you want to take it, but I was thinking about Ms. Schweller about that alternative entry that was discussed in the public hearing previously. And then I would like to make sure that I'm correct in the way I'm reading those counts, the traffic counts. That number is implying both a trip to and a trip from, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So if we're talking 150 cars in round numbers and 2 people are planned for each automobile, that would be 75. 2 trips would be 150. So that's how that number would be arrived at?
Right, and let me go back to the proper slide here. Again, this is copied out of the application, but it's citing a measure in our own zoning ordinance. So venues must provide 1 parking space per 2.5 participants. So that's the generic standard that we apply for determining how much parking space is needed. You know, a lot of vehicles come with 2 people, some come with 3, some 1 or 4. It works out to about 1 per 2.5 participants.
And that previously used entry road in the time of the riding school?
Let me pull this map back up. Sorry, from the wrong direction. I believe when you said public hearing, you may have meant community meeting.
Excuse me, I meant community meeting, yes.
I'm sorry to be tedious about that, but I just want there to be no confusion. There have been
You
no
are
public hearings.
we need to be accurate. You are correct. I apologize for the wrong term.
Not a problem. Just wanted to make sure everybody understood. There have been no public hearings on this item, but there was a community meeting held online. Now let's see here. The Kingsway Road at Plank Road is the proposed entrance, and I believe that was the previous entrance for the equestrian facility, which is where this event building would be. There is a separate entrance for the house itself on the property here, just to the east on Plank Road. There's another entrance down here on Dick Woods Road, which is very minimal and very close to some of these adjacent buildings, that I don't believe anyone foresees being used for anything other than an alternative access for emergency vehicles.
And which is the road that is shared with property, adjacent property?
Kingsway Road, and again, this goes back to, as I said, originally, long ago in the 70s, this was a planned development. And these lots on the south side have access rights to some walking trails on this property and to the use of Kingsway Road, which is the one here I indicated, which is intended to be the also to be the access for the event use.
Okay, one final question. Under the state's agritourism, I'm assuming that what would be allowed under the state's agritourism is not covered as a by right here, and that's why the need for the special use permit?
That's correct. There's a distinction in the state code that resulted from the lobbying and updating of our state policies from the wine and other industries, where, for example, winery events up to a certain number are by right because they are directly tied to an agricultural use. The special events use, which is only really it's specific to Albemarle County as far as I know, is an event use that does not require a tie to agriculture and so isn't really related to those state measures regarding agritourism. When we first discussed the adoption of this use in 2003 or so, it was originally intended to be a use for helping to provide maintenance income for historic sites. Before it was actually adopted into the code, it was expanded well beyond that and is technically available to any property in the rural areas. But because it doesn't have a tie to agriculture, it always requires a special use permit, whereas a winery event or a brewery event does not, at least up to 200 people.
Thank you very much.
All right, Ann, I think it's your turn.
Right, my question was, is Kingsway still it looked as if Scott was showing Kingsway as the entrance when he was sweeping his mouse around over there. So I just wanted to verify that because I had different information given that they were going for some other place. I am equally befuddled as others about the traffic counts because not all people come in pairs. And the one part that is not considered at all, but is a tremendous impact to neighbors at other gathering things, are the setup and takedown, where you have multiple big panel trucks full of chairs, tables, etc., that come hours before and come and go, and the caterers bring the food, and those people stay much later. So that, I guess, doesn't necessarily fall into the agforestal thing, but it does impact traffic. So I think those kinds of things should be included when you look at traffic counts going, as this develops going forward. The wildlife part of the agforestal ordinances will certainly be affected by the extra traffic. This is a really crummy section of road along in here. As many of you who have driven it before will know, frequently you have to jump off in the ditch when somebody's coming in the other direction because of the fact that it's so narrow. So that is something others will have to relate to. As I said, the setup and takedown traffic and the identification of Kingsway as the main access, which certainly impacts all those neighbors, are what I asked about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, and we were looking forward to getting more information about that when the applicant resubmits so that we can have more detailed information on the Kingsway situation with shared maintenance and all of that. And also, I am trying to find, again, this is not really an Ag 4 issue, but I am trying to find out more about the accident rates and related issues on the nearby roads, which would come in with the regular staff report on the permit.
Right. Even if there's a different reapplication, this would probably be the only meeting that Ag Forestal will have about this, or you'll determine if it's a significant change, I guess, when the new application or the resubmittal comes in, if it does. sometime in the future. And then,
Yeah, I mean, normally we would only have one advisory committee meeting, whatever the committee is, on a proposal like this. I suppose if there was a major either intensification or reduction in the scale of a use that was going before an advisory committee, we could easily
yeah,
bring it back.
you'll have to figure that out. Thank you.
Right, yeah, we won't know for a while yet.
Any other discussion within the committee?
Yeah, so I think there's a major traffic issue here. And I think it will definitely impede the farms in the area, the mini farms in the area. You know, they mentioned 14, 18, I can't remember what events taking place a year. But I mean, let's be real, all those events are going to take place in 3 months when the weather is perfect outside, which is also when farming is probably at its most active in this area. And then I just worry about the impact on the wildlife in this area. You know, in full transparency, I live here. Wildlife are extremely prevalent. I worry how this is going to impact them as well.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I have a comment that if the things that might change in this proposal are things that would affect what we decide, it seems like we should defer this this item until later when it's when it's ready to go before those other bodies, so that we can give our opinion based on the more relevant information. And maybe I can make that motion when we get to that point, but I just wanted to say that it sounds like there's too many kind of variables at this point.
Thank you. Shall we listen to public comment at this point?
This is Liz Suffin speaking. I would just like to add a comment that noise is also a form of ecological pollution and should be considered such in as we review our role in conservation easement protection. And it's not a trivial situation, the noise, not only for people, but also for other forms of wildlife. And I think it's very important to combine the traffic and noise situation as being a significant impact on this proposal. So I would propose that we decline this proposal or vote against it at this point in time and not wait for further information on the number of trips that they're going in and out. And Ann's point about caterers is just going to add on top of all of this concern.
Thank you. But I believe by our earlier procedures, we yet have input from public comment before we'll entertain a motion on this item. So at this point, do we have anyone from the public who would like to make a presentation, Carolyn?
Lori Schweller is the only one that has her name up. We don't have anybody from the public with their hand raised.
Well, I think we're ready for Ms. Sweller then.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Wavertree Hall Farm and its manor home Bellevue are listed on the National Historic Register. And so what is proposed here is a use similar to the ones you were trying to protect in your previous item. As Scott mentioned, this particular use, which requires a special use permit, was created to provide maintenance income for historic properties. And this property is protected by a Virginia Outdoors Foundation conservation easement. The applicant has been working very closely with the Department of Historic Resources and VOF. There are 18 structures on the property, has documented and is working with DHR to make sure that all of those are improved and protected. There are no new impervious surfaces proposed. The existing gravel driveway would be improved by the applicant and maintained by the applicant, and no other impervious surfaces would be used. What's proposed for use is the old riding ring structure that is now out of use. The prior owners used it for riding events. That would be used for events. and the parking areas would be pervious surfaces, grass surfaces. So we think that this impact would be far less than the impact from a by right winery where events of 200 people could be permitted by right. We're only proposing 18 events per year, only 150 people per event, except for 4. And so it has a much lesser impact than the by right from winery. I should also note that the property is used for hay right now. There would be no interference whatsoever because only the existing paved surfaces would be used for the events. And the applicant may actually plant vines as well in that area to sell grapes to neighboring wineries. So the applicant, its use will not interfere with agricultural uses and in fact will continue to support agricultural uses in the area. Further, the applicant has worked on a detailed traffic management plan, noise management plan, has hired a noise consultant and come up with a very detailed report, and has done an extreme amount of due diligence to ensure that it has no negative impact to the surrounding neighbors.
Thank you. Still no other members of the public asking to speak?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Back to the committee. With the additional input, we've heard staff's recommendations and we've heard from the applicant's representative. Is there any additional discussion about this topic?
I guess the only input I would have is that the applicant may benefit if the district, the AFD considers this when all the latest information is put together when the next submission comes in. They may get a different response or a better response, or I don't know, but it just seems useful that we have all the latest information when the committee makes your decision.
Thank you, Ann.
Just from a staff perspective, it's easy enough to bring this back after resubmittal if you all prefer to do that instead of making a final action today. We can do it either way.
So just to summarize the discussion, if I may, it seems that the committee had several questions and concerns. Noise effects not only on neighbors, which is not necessarily our purview as the AFD district, but also noise as it affects the greater pollution of the ecological benefits. There were some water quality issues raised by additional vehicles using impervious and pervious surfaces adjacent to what appears to be a perennial stream. There were other concerns about how increased traffic would impact the other agrarian businesses in and about the area in the adjacent districts. Did I capture most of our discussion?
I believe so.
Yes.
So that leaves us several options to entertain a motion to move forward on this particular proposal. To defer a decision until the resubmittal, which appears to be necessary, is completed, or to take action based upon the information we have for us today.
So David, I want to make a comment first that in the first one we listened to how there were concerns that the cell tower would basically reduce the traffic to the winery. And now we're talking about the opposite, and that there'd be too much traffic to this event. So I think that's a little, odd. It's a little backwards from the first thing we listened to. And after listening to Ms. Sweller, I'm not quite sure there is a whole lot more that we might hear in the future, but it does seem that we should be a little closer to the time. I don't know, is there a proposed time this is supposed to go to the Planning Commission?
No, this is not scheduled. It's currently deferred.
Is deferred. Okay, then I would then make a motion, if it's okay to do that now, that we defer this until a time in advance of the Planning Commission meeting when that gets scheduled.
So we have a motion on the table. Do we have a second?
Second that.
Second that.
Thank you. So motion is to defer until it's resubmitted for consideration of the Planning Commission. Did I understand that correctly?
Correct.
We should ask Scott whether deferral, that has a kind of a legal meaning in land use. Maybe, is it okay to use that in this, Scott, or would it be?
Yeah,
opposed?
that's fine. Again, this is not a public hearing, so deferring consideration is a more casual term in this case, and that's perfectly fine. I understand what the committee wants. My cat doesn't.
Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion on the table, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, please say no. Thank you. The motion carries.
Thank you. Going by that, I understand that our direction will be to bring this back to the committee with the further details provided based on the resubmitted application that we expect to receive in the future.
That's as I understand it. So next on our agenda is old business. So I will ask the committee, is there any old business that we need to address?
No old business. There need to be a motion, David?
I think it does not.
No, you don't need a motion to pass on from.
Okay.
If there's no old business, you can just move on to the next item.
Thank you. Here are no old business brought forward. Our next agenda item is new business. Is there any new items to bring forward before the committee? All right, I hear no new business. I would like to thank each and every one of you on the committee and those of you who joined us from the public while we deliberated on the agenda items tonight, and appreciate everybody's input. And I'm happy to note that we still managed to mostly reside within our time limit. So thank you. I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
A motion that we adjourn at 7:31 p.m.
I second.
Thank you. So moved. Everybody be safe and have a good evening.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody.
Great evening.